the whisper that changed everything. The lights inside the hall were soft and golden. Hundreds of people had gathered, their voices filling the air with gentle excitement. It was one of those evenings where time felt slower, where every small detail carried a strange importance. Sandra Bullock stood on the side of the stage, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She had been on many stages before. She had spoken in front of cameras, directors, and the biggest audiences in the world. But tonight was different. Tonight, Keanu Reeves was only a few feet away, and that alone made her feel like she was carrying a secret too heavy to hide. Keanu was calm, as always. He had that quiet smile that seemed to belong to another world, a smile that carried kindness, but also silence. People often said his calmness made them feel safe. Sandra knew this more than anyone else. She had seen the way he never rushed, the way he listened, the way he gave space without judgment. And for years, those small details had grown into something she never dared to speak out loud. But as she looked at him tonight, she felt something shift inside her, something she could no longer bury. The evening was supposed to be about honoring artists and storytellers, but Sandra's own story was burning inside her chest. The audience clapped as Keanu spoke with his steady voice, thanking people for their support, speaking about resilience, about kindness, about staying humble even when the world pushes you into the spotlight. Every word he spoke felt heavier on Sandra's heart. It was as if he was unknowingly pulling her closer to the edge of a confession she had kept for too long. She remembered the first time she met him years ago. He was shy, respectful, not trying to impress anyone. While others rushed for attention, he quietly carried chairs for the crew, offered his jacket to someone who was cold, and even helped pick up small things that had fallen from a worker's bag. Sandra had thought then, this man is different. Over the years, she had laughed with him, argued with him, learned from him. She had watched how he treated everyone equally, from famous stars to waiters in a small cafe. That respect, that humility, had built something deep inside her soul. But tonight, as the hall went quiet after Keanu's speech, Sandra felt her chest tighten. Her palms grew damp, and she whispered to herself, almost in fear, "Not here, not now." Yet something inside told her that if she kept waiting, she might never say it at all. Sometimes life only gives one chance, one moment that refuses to come again. She looked at him and he looked back. His eyes, calm but searching, held hers for a little too long, and in that silence, she knew. She had to say it. When the applause faded, Sandra slowly walked toward him. Her steps echoed faintly against the wooden floor. The audience thought she was moving closer just to congratulate him, but in truth, every step was a war between her fear and her courage. She stood beside him, smiled politely at the crowd, and then leaned closer so only he could hear. Her voice was a whisper, trembling, but clear enough to carry the weight of her truth. "Keanu," she whispered, "I love you." For a second, time seemed to freeze. The words left her lips like fragile glass, breaking the years of silence she had built around her heart. The hall was still filled with people, yet in that instant, it felt as though only two souls existed. Keanu blinked, his calm face unchanged, but his eyes widened just enough to show the world inside him had shifted. The silence stretched. Sandra's heart pounded so loudly she thought the audience might hear it. What came next was not what anyone expected. Keanu did not step back. He did not laugh. He did not hide. Instead, he looked at her straight into her eyes with a gaze so deep that Sandra felt her knees weaken. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for the microphone again. The hall waited, unaware of what had just passed between them. And in that quiet moment, the next words from Keanu Reeves shocked everyone. The reaction that stunned the hall was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from nothing happening, but the kind of silence that holds a storm inside it. Sandra's whisper still echoed in her own heart. She could barely breathe. Her words, "I love you," had left her lips only moments ago, and now they lived in the air between her and Keanu. She was terrified, not because of rejection, but because of the weight of truth. Once truth is spoken, it cannot be pulled back. It changes everything. Keanu stood tall, his hand still on the microphone, his calm face almost unreadable. But his eyes told a different story. They were no longer just calm. They carried fire, confusion, and a softness that few had ever seen. The audience thought he was simply preparing to speak again, maybe to finish his earlier words of kindness. But those who sat close enough saw it. The way his hand trembled slightly. The way his lips pressed together as if holding back something powerful. Sandra tried to smile, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But her body betrayed her. Her shoulders were tense, her hands curled into fists at her side. She wanted to look away, to step back into the crowd and hide. But Keanu's gaze held her like a chain. He opened his mouth, and the world leaned forward. "Sometimes," Keanu said slowly, his voice steady but heavy, "the most powerful words are not the ones we say to millions, but the ones whispered when no one else is listening." His words landed like thunder. People clapped at first, thinking it was just another poetic thought, another humble reflection. But Sandra's heart dropped. She realized he was answering her, not the audience. He had heard her. He had chosen to respond, not with rejection or surprise, but with meaning that only she could truly understand. Her breath caught in her throat. Keanu's eyes shifted back to the audience. "Life is fragile," he continued. "We often wait, too long to say what matters, because we are afraid of what will change, afraid of what others will think. But courage is not found in big speeches or in movies. It is found in the small moments, when the heart speaks, and we choose to listen." Applause erupted again, this time louder but different. People felt something unusual in his tone, a depth that was not rehearsed, not written on a script. The words struck them in ways they did not fully understand. But for Sandra, it was like the ground had opened beneath her feet. She had whispered her love in fear, and instead of pushing her away, Keanu had turned her truth into a lesson for the world. She wanted to cry, but she could not. She wanted to laugh, but her lips would not move. All she could do was stand there, her soul burning, while Keanu carried on as if nothing had broken, when in fact everything had changed. When the event ended, the lights dimmed, and people began to leave. Sandra stayed behind, her thoughts spinning like a storm. Keanu walked off the stage, his usual calm walk, but Sandra noticed he did not look at anyone else. He walked straight toward her. She froze. The whispers of people leaving filled the air, but for her, the sound faded to nothing. He stopped in front of her, his eyes soft, his voice low. "You know they heard my words," he said gently, "but only you know why I said them." Sandra swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, but her throat was dry. Keanu's presence was overwhelming, not because of fame, not because of the man everyone admired, but because of the honesty in his gaze. It was the kind of gaze that stripped away walls, that left no place to hide. Her chest tightened. "I should not have said it," Sandra whispered, her voice breaking. "Not here. Not now." Keanu shook his head slowly. "You were brave," he said. "Sometimes we do not get to choose the perfect moment. Sometimes the moment chooses us." His words pierced her heart. Sandra had lived years with this silence, years of wondering what might happen if she ever spoke the truth. And now, within one evening, the silence had shattered. She wanted to ask him what he truly felt, if her whisper had broken something or begun something new. But before she could, Keanu stepped back. "Walk with me," he said softly. They moved together through the quiet corridors behind the stage. The world outside buzzed with cameras, questions, and flashing lights, but here, in the narrow passage, there was only silence, only them. Sandra felt the weight of every step, the closeness of his presence, the uncertainty of what waited at the end of the hallway. When they reached a quiet corner, away from everyone else, Keanu finally stopped. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed a storm. "Sandra," he said, "you changed everything tonight." Her heart pounded. She looked at him, afraid, but also strangely free. "And what do you feel about that?" she whispered. For the first time in years, Keanu Reeves, the man who carried calm like a shield, looked shaken. His lips parted and the truth began to escape. The truth behind his calm eyes: the corridor was dim, with only a soft light glowing above them. Sandra felt like the whole world had disappeared, leaving only her and Keanu standing face to face. Her whisper of love still lingered between them like an invisible flame, and Keanu's words, "You changed everything tonight," echoed in her heart. She waited, her breath heavy, her body trembling, for what he would say next. Keanu's calm eyes, the same eyes that had always brought comfort, now looked restless. For years, people had called him a mystery, a man who carried his pain and kindness in silence. But tonight, Sandra saw something different. His silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, as if carrying truths too fragile to release. "Sandra," he began, his voice low, "I have lived much of my life holding back. People think silence means peace, but often silence is fear. Fear of breaking what already feels fragile. Fear of losing what little you have left." Sandra's chest tightened. She had never heard him speak like this. He had always been measured, always gentle, but now his voice carried cracks, like glass under pressure. He turned slightly, leaning against the wall, his eyes looking at the ground. "You think I am calm," he continued, "but the truth is, inside me, storms have always raged. I have lost too much to speak lightly about love. And when you whispered those words tonight, it was like a door I had locked long ago suddenly opened." Sandra stepped closer. "And what did you see behind that door?" she asked softly, her voice shaking. Keanu lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time, she saw them glisten. "I saw you," he said. Her breath caught. The simplicity of those words hit harder than anything she had imagined. But even in that moment of hope, a shadow crossed his face. "But," he whispered, "love is not simple for me. It never has been." His words cut through her heart like a blade. She wanted to argue, to tell him that love could be simple if two hearts were brave enough, but before she could, he continued. "You know about the losses I've faced," he said quietly. "You know the emptiness I have carried. Sometimes I wonder if opening my heart again would be fair, or if it would only bring pain to someone who deserves better than my broken pieces." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She had known his pain. Yes. She had seen how life had tested him with cruel tragedies, how he had walked through fire yet still offered kindness to the world. But to hear him doubt himself, to hear him believe that he was unworthy of love, tore at her soul. "Keanu," she whispered firmly, "you are not broken. You are human. Every scar you carry is not weakness. It is proof of your strength. You know how many people admire you not just for your work but for your heart. You give hope to millions by being yourself. How could you ever think you are not worthy of love?" He closed his eyes, her words sinking into him like rain on dry soil. The silence stretched again, but this silence was different. It was not heavy with fear, but with thought, with struggle, with the weight of a man trying to choose between the walls of his past and the possibility of something new. Then, with a suddenness that startled her, Keanu stepped closer. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that revealed the storm inside. "Sandra," he said, "do you understand what you risked tonight? You spoke those words in front of a world that watches every move, every whisper, every gesture. They will take your truth and twist it. They will turn it into headlines, into noise, into judgment. Do you know what that means for you?" Sandra straightened her back, her fear melting into resolve. "Yes," she said, "I know, but I would rather face their noise than live another day in silence." His eyes widened. Her courage shook him. For years, he had been the one others looked to for strength, but now, standing in that quiet corridor, Sandra Bullock had become the mirror that forced him to confront his own fears. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it was not relief. It was sorrow mixed with admiration. "You are braver than I am," he murmured. "No," Sandra said quickly, "I'm not. I'm terrified, but bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to speak, even when your voice shakes." Her words cut through the last of the silence. Keanu turned fully toward her, his face only inches away from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath, the intensity of his gaze. For a heartbeat, she thought he would finally say the words she longed to hear, the words that would tie their souls together. But instead, he whispered something no one expected. "Then maybe it is time I tell you the truth, too." Sandra's heart pounded. "What truth?" she asked, her voice trembling. Keanu's lips pressed into a line, his jaw tight, his eyes fierce with emotion. And then, with a breath that sounded like it carried years of weight, he said softly, "You were not the only one holding back." Coax. Secret he could no longer hide. The corridor seemed smaller now, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to hear his words. Sandra's heart raced after hearing him say, "You were not the only one holding back." She searched his face, looking for clues, for some sign of what he meant. Keanu's eyes dropped for a moment, as if he were afraid to let her see too much. When he finally lifted them again, there was no calm left to hide behind. There was vulnerability, raw and unshielded. "For years," he began, his voice heavy, "I carried feelings I never allowed myself to admit. Every time we worked together, every time we laughed, every time you showed your kindness, I felt something grow inside me. But I told myself it was impossible. I convinced myself that silence was safer, that friendship was enough, that you deserved someone whole while I was still learning to live with my broken pieces." Sandra's breath caught. The words she had longed to hear, the truth she had imagined in secret moments, were now being spoken aloud. And yet, instead of relief, her chest tightened even more. Because the pain in his voice told her this truth was not simple. "Keanu," she whispered, but he raised his hand gently, stopping her from speaking. "I wanted to tell you many times," he continued, his eyes dark with memory. "But life has a way of testing me. Every time I thought about confessing, something pulled me back. I thought about the losses I've faced. I thought about the fragile peace I've built. I thought about how cruel the world can be when it decides to twist something pure, and so I stayed silent, even when it hurt." His words struck her like a storm. Sandra wanted to tell him he did not need to fear, that she was not afraid of the world's cruelty. But before she could, he added something that cut even deeper. "And there is something else," he said, his voice lower now, almost breaking. "A part of me has always feared that if I opened my heart again, I would lose it all again, and I could not survive that one more time." The confession stunned Sandra. She knew his past, the tragedies that had shaped his soul. She had always admired his strength, his resilience. But now she understood the full truth. His silence had not been indifference. It had been survival. Her tears fell, not from pain alone, but from the weight of finally understanding him. She stepped closer, so close that the distance between Them was nothing but air. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "You will not lose me. I am not here to leave. I am here to stay. Do you hear me?" Keanu looked at her, his face softening, his calmness returning like a fragile tide. "You say that now," he murmured. "But when the world begins to judge, when the headlines twist your truth, when the whispers become louder than your own heart, will you still feel the same?" Sandra did not flinch. She straightened her shoulders, her voice stronger than before. "Let them judge. Let them twist. I know what I feel, and I will not let fear steal this from us." For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside was still full of noise, but in that small corridor, time slowed to a stillness that was almost holy. Then, slowly, Keanu reached for her hand. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant, as if afraid she would pull away. But Sandra held on tightly, her fingers curling into his with a certainty that left no doubt. Their eyes locked, and for the first time in years, the calm man the world admired allowed his walls to fall. His voice was quiet, but it carried the power of 1,000 unspoken moments. "I love you too, Sandra," he whispered. Her heart stopped. The words she had waited to hear, the words she thought she might never hear, had finally been spoken. But before joy could flood her fully, a sudden sound broke the moment. The echo of footsteps at the far end of the corridor. Both turned their heads sharply. Someone was coming. The world they had tried to keep hidden for those few fragile minutes was about to be exposed. Whispers in the shadows, the footsteps grew louder in the quiet corridor. Sandra's hand was still in Keanu's, their fingers locked, in a truth that had only just been spoken. Her heart was racing, not only from the weight of his words, "I love you too," but also from the fear that their fragile moment might be discovered before it even had the chance to breathe. Keanu's eyes flicked toward the approaching sound, then back to Sandra. His calm expression returned, but she could see the tension in his jaw. Years of being in the public eye had taught him one thing. Privacy was precious, and once it was broken, it could never be restored. A stage assistant turned the corner carrying a stack of papers. She froze when she saw them standing so close. Together, their hands intertwined. Sandra felt her breath catch, but Keanu didn't pull away. Instead, he calmly nodded at the assistant, his voice as steady as always. "Thank you for your hard work tonight," he said warmly. The assistant blinked, her eyes darting between them. She forced a smile, nodded quickly, and hurried past, disappearing down the hall. But the way her expression had shifted, the way her steps had quickened, told them both the same thing. She had seen more than she should have. Sandra let out a shaky breath. "She saw us." Keanu nodded slowly. "And soon the world may know." Sandra's grip tightened on his hand. "Let them. I'm not afraid anymore." He studied her for a moment, his eyes soft but still clouded with worry. "You are stronger than you know," he whispered. "But strength is not just about facing the world. It is about facing the storm that follows." Sandra's voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. "Then we will face it together." His lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind of smile that carried both sadness and hope. He lifted her hand slightly as if to seal her words, then released it gently. "Together," he echoed. But as they walked toward the exit, flashes of cameras lit up from the distance. Reporters had already begun gathering outside, hungry for any glimpse of the stars. The night that began with celebration now felt like the beginning of a battle. Outside, the air was cold, filled with shouts and the sharp snap of cameras. Sandra stepped closer to Keanu, her arm brushing against his. The crowd's energy was overwhelming, but Keanu's calm presence grounded her. Still, she could feel eyes on them, searching, judging, speculating. A voice shouted from the crowd, louder than the rest. "Keanu? Sandra? Are you two together? Is it true?" The question sliced through the chaos like a blade. Sandra's heart pounded, but before she could answer, Keanu's hand gently touched her back. His calm voice rose above the noise, steady, kind, unshaken. "What matters most," he said, "is not what the world demands to know, but what two people know in their hearts." The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked faster and whispers rippled through the reporters. Sandra looked at him in shock. He hadn't denied it. He hadn't hidden it. His words were careful, but they carried a truth that everyone could feel. As they pushed through the chaos toward the waiting car, Sandra whispered, "You just told them without telling them." Keanu glanced at her, his calm smile returning. Sometimes the truth is not shouted, sometimes it is felt. They slipped into the car, the noise of the crowd muffled as the doors closed. For a moment, silence wrapped around them again. Sandra turned to him, her eyes wet with emotion. "You risked everything by saying that." Keanu looked out the window, then back at her. "No," he said softly. "We risked nothing, because what we have now is real. And real things are worth facing the world for." Sandra's hand found his again, and this time neither of them let go. But as the car drove away, she couldn't ignore the feeling building inside her chest. Something told her that tonight was only the beginning, because the world had seen a glimpse. And the world was not going to stay silent. When the world began to speak, the morning after their whispered confessions, the world no longer felt quiet. Headlines spread across every screen, every paper, every website. Photos of Sandra and Keanu leaving together filled the news, their closeness analyzed, their silence turned into stories. Mystery romance between Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. One headline read, "Was this the confession of the year?" asked another. Some articles praised the two, calling their connection pure and inspiring. Others turned it into noise, questioning their choices, twisting their words. The same truth that had given them courage now became food for gossip. And the storm Keanu had feared finally began. Inside Sandra's home, she sat by the window, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages. Some were from friends, some from strangers. Some offered love, others threw judgment. She scrolled through comments on social media, her heart heavy. Some called their moment beautiful, but others were cruel, suggesting it was for attention or questioning their sincerity. Her chest tightened. She had expected whispers, but she hadn't imagined how loud they would be. Then her phone rang. It was Keanu. His calm voice reached her through the line. "Don't read too much, Sandra," he said softly. "The world will always talk, but only we know the truth." Sandra closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's harder than I thought. I thought I was ready, but the noise, it's everywhere." There was silence for a moment. Then Keanu's steady voice again. "Listen to me. Do you remember what you told me in the corridor? You said you would rather face their noise than live another day in silence." Her breath shook. "Yes. Then this is the test of those words," he said gently. "We cannot control what they say. We can only control how we stand together." His calmness steadied her heart again, just like it always did. Later that evening, they met at a quiet cafe, one hidden away from flashing lights. They sat in a corner, no cameras, no crowd, just two souls trying to find peace. Sandra looked at him across the small table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Do you regret me saying those words?" Keanu shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Truth should never be regret, but truth does demand strength." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "Then, we'll be strong together," He gave her a small smile, but his eyes were still heavy. "There is something I fear more than the noise," he admitted. Sandra frowned. "What is that?" His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Losing you to it." Her chest ached. She understood now. His calmness, his silence, all of it had been a shield to protect himself from the kind of pain that could break him again. And now, by choosing her, he had chosen to put down that shield. She squeezed his hand tightly. "You won't lose me," she said, her voice steady. "Not to them, not to anyone." The cafe was quiet, but their promise felt louder than the world outside. Still, deep in her heart, Sandra knew the storm was only growing. The next days would test not only their feelings, but also their resilience, their ability to hold on when the world tried to pull them apart. And as they left the cafe that night, walking side by side under the dim streetlights, a shadowy figure across the street lifted a camera, snapping pictures quietly in the dark. The storm was far from over. Love in the storm. The next morning, the world exploded with new headlines. The secret photographs taken at the cafe spread everywhere. The images showed Keanu and Sandra sitting close, their hands brushing, their eyes locked as if no one else existed. For some, the photos were proof of love, something pure in a world that often felt cold. For others, it was a reason to speculate, to gossip, to pull apart something they did not understand. News shows debated it, social media filled with endless comments, and once again, the storm Keanu had feared became reality. Sandra sat in her living room, the screen glowing with images of herself and Keanu. Her phone buzzed constantly. Some messages were kind, cheering her bravery, calling the moment inspiring. Others were harsh, accusing, judgmental. Each word stung, but she refused to let them sink into her heart. Keanu arrived quietly that evening, knocking softly on her door. When she opened it, his calm eyes met hers, steady but carrying the same storm that raged outside. "It has begun," he said gently. Sandra nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "Yes, and it feels louder than I imagined." They sat together, the silence between them heavy but safe. After a while, Keanu spoke again, his voice steady, as if drawing from a well of strength deeper than the noise outside. "Do you remember what I told the crowd that night? I said the most powerful words are the ones whispered when no one else is listening." Sandra nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Then let us not forget," he continued. "What matters most is not what they shout, but what we whisper to each other in the quiet." Her chest swelled with emotion. She realized then that love was not measured by the noise of the world, but by the courage to hold on to the whispers that mattered. Days turned into weeks, and the storm refused to quiet. Interviewers pressed them for answers. Photographers followed, their every step, and the public created stories out of moments they barely understood. But through it all, Keanu and Sandra found strength in small things. Shared walks in hidden parks, simple meals cooked together, laughter at old memories, the comfort of knowing that no matter what the world said, they still had each other. One evening, after a long day filled with endless noise, Keanu and Sandra sat together on her balcony. The city lights twinkled below, but above them, the stars glowed quietly, untouched by the chaos of human voices. Sandra leaned against him, her voice soft. "Sometimes I wonder if love is supposed to be this hard." Keanu wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on the night sky. "Love is not hard," he said. "The world makes it hard. But the truth between two hearts is always simple. I love you. You love me. That is the truth. Everything else is only shadows." Tears filled her eyes. His words, simple yet deep, cut through all the noise. "Then promise me something," she whispered. "Anything," he said. Promise me that no matter how loud the world becomes, we will never let the whispers between us fade." He turned to her, his calm eyes reflecting the stars. "I promise." And with that promise, their storm found meaning. Because love was not about silence or noise, about hiding or shouting. It was about resilience, about choosing each other again and again, no matter how many storms the world sent their way. Weeks later, they appeared together at another event. The hall was packed, cameras flashing, voices rising with questions. But when they walked onto the stage side by side, their hands quietly joined, the hall fell silent. Keanu looked at the crowd, his calm voice filling the space. "We live in a world where love is often tested by noise," he said. "But love is not for the crowd. It is for the heart. Sandra and I are here not to prove anything to the world, but simply to live our truth with respect, humility, and kindness." The audience erupted in applause, not just for the words, but for the courage behind them. Sandra looked at him, her heart swelling with pride and love. And in that moment, she knew the storm had not destroyed them. It had revealed their strength. The journey was not perfect. There would still be noise, still be whispers, still be shadows. But their love, born in silence and tested in storms, was unbreakable. And as they walked off the stage together, Sandra leaned closer, whispering the same words she had spoken on the first night, the words that had changed everything. "I love you." This time, Keanu did not hesitate. He whispered back with a calm certainty that carried both his pain and his healing. "And I will always love you." And with those words, their story found its truth. Not in headlines, not in noise, but in the quiet whispers of two hearts that chose each other, no matter what.